Get ready to dim the lights and lock your doors. Friday Night Frights is here to haunt your weekend. Every Friday night, we bring you spine-chilling tales of the macabre, the mysterious, and the downright terrifying. From cursed artifacts to shadowy creatures lurking in the dark, these stories will keep you on the edge of your seat long after the episode ends. Are you brave enough to listen? Tune in and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more eerie episodes. Tonight we are reading The Cats by Robert Westall. So pour yourself a cup of something hot and get ready for a story that will make you think twice about the next time you hear a soft, eerie meow in the dead of night. This is Friday Night Frights. The Cats. Today, there was a cat in the house. There has been no cat even on the grounds for 30 years, since we bought it. My dogs have seen to that. I am a dog person. I came in from the garden, stripping off my gardening gloves, my eyes full of sunlight, thinking about nothing in particular. I went upstairs to get changed for tea, and there it was, sitting at the head of the stairs, perfectly at home, looking down on me as if I were the intruder. Well, let me tell you, I hate cats, but I had to admit it was a prime specimen, a blotched tabby with great thick gouts of pure black running down its coat. Almost, in the sunlight on the stair, a black cat with stripes of golden guard hairs like networks of stars. Big, fat, silently purring, so hard it was rocking slightly with pleasure, the way cats do, as if it had got something it had waited for a long time. Certainly the purring was not for me. Its eyes, staring into mine, were as cold as green ice. As cold as mine, I suppose. It looked at me as if it were my equal, as if it were my superior. Its claws were extending and retracting in time with its purring. I waved my gloves in its face, shooed at it. It did not move. It held its place. You may say it could not get past me, down the stairs. It did not even want to get past me. It wanted to keep me out of my own house. I grew uneasy as I stood there on the 6th step down. I noticed again how big it was, how big the claws, extending and contracting. On the top step, it was nearly level with my face. It looked, a nasty beggar to tackle. Animals should know the rules. My dogs have always known the rules. This cat didn't. And when animals don't know the rules... Well, I backed down a few steps, called to my dogs, knowing they wouldn't be far behind me, coming in from the garden, yawning and stretching. But they did not come. They did not even answer, those useless brutes. Nervous, I turned back quickly to face the cat, frightened it might spring. It was gone from the stairhead. It was not in the upstairs corridor, and all the doors were shut, except the one to my husband's study. I went in a bit of a temper. My husband used to be very fond of cats when he was young. I had a feeling he might have encouraged this one. But he was asleep in the swivel chair at his desk, a big book on the Adriatic open on his knees. He was having his fallow time, as he calls it. He had finished this year's play for the West End. At the end of August, we were going off to the Adriatic for this year's travel book. He spends his fallow time reading and dozing in the sun. When you're nearly 70, I suppose it's permissible. He does work hard when he is working. His face looked somehow different, a little transparent. You watch them when they get to that age, but he was breathing very softly, normally, so I just put it down to the late afternoon sun that was flooding the room with light. In any case, he awakened then, stretched and smiled, to himself, not at me. He hadn't even realized I was there. "Nice dream?" I asked. He closed his eyes again, instantly. The wrinkles round his closed mouth moved, resorting themselves into a new expression. Then he opened his eyes and looked at me and said, "Can't remember it, but yes, nice." Liar, I thought. Whatever your dream was, I wouldn't have been welcome in it. I was cross, so I said, "There was a damned cat on the stairs. Hasn't been in here, has it?" "I've seen no cat. What color was it?" Once he's got his defensive wall up, there's no getting past it. "Big tabby thing, fat and cocky, faced up to me on my own staircase. Didn't give a damn." "You should have set your dogs on it." "Damned dogs were nowhere to be seen." He was laughing at me, inside himself. I can always tell. Then he said, "The cat sounds a bit like old Mirabelle." He spoke as if Mirabelle were still around, not dead for nearly 40 years. Then I knew he was really sticking his knife into me, so I went and had a shower. Showers usually perk me up, but not this one. I took the late Mirabelle in with me and brought her out again. Mirabelle was the cat he had when I first met him, when he was plain Harry Tremblett, failed poet and pub crawler, not Sir Harold Tremblett, playwright, travel writer, and critic. Living in a 3-room basement in King's Cross, with rows of dirty milk bottles at the door and rows of empty wine bottles by the area dust bins. God knew how he kept himself in booze. God knew how he could bear to live in that slum of unmade bed and dirty plates with the cold tap dripping on them, and an old wind-up gramophone piled with scratched 78s of Bunk Johnson and Bessie Smith. And the queen of that slum was Mirabelle, with her knowledgeable eyes that had seen everything and told nothing. I don't know how I ever slept on that bed with that cat watching all the time. The cat would come sliding over, fussing at him, licking his sweating face, trying to force herself between us, so that he accused her of being jealous and laughed with delight. She lasted a long time, did Mirabelle, longer than the unmade bed, or the dirty plates, or the rows of empties, longer even than all his revolting friends, the well-heeled amateur communists, the duffel-coated anarchists, and the ex-girlfriends who thought they could absorb me into their complacent ranks. Mirabelle was the last thing to go. It was after my father got him that temporary lectureship at Leeds, the first step he made up the ladder. I'd arranged everything, the university flat where pets were forbidden, even the friends who would take Mirabelle off our hands. Then, the day before we left, Mirabelle got ill. Suddenly she was uncontrollably messing all over the flat. It's lucky we were packed by that time. I told him, "You can't expect my friends to have her now, messing all over the place. She'll have to go, Harry." He gaped at me. "Go where?" "Be put to sleep. She's over 10 years old." "But the vet could make her better." "And how much would that cost? Treatment and drugs and kennel bills. You've hardly got the train fare to Leeds." "Lend me the money." "No, I've lent you enough. I have to earn it the hard way. I'm not wasting it on a damned cat." He sat down and took her on his knee, a little gingerly. He glared at me and said, "I'm not going to Leeds. You can stuff your bloody Leeds and your stinking little bourgeois lectureship. I'm staying here with Mirabelle, and I'm going to make her well, and we're going to live here and be happy." "You've given up the lease," I said. "The new people are moving in tomorrow, God help them." "I'm not going." Suit yourself then. I'll tell my father you're resigning, that you don't want the flat up there, and you won't be seeing any more of me either. Blow this chance and we're finished." He put his head down. I didn't realize he was crying until the drops of water began hitting Mirabelle's tangled fur. God, I just can't stand men who cry. It just disgusts me. So I threw down a couple of pound notes onto the old washed-out mattress and said, "That's to pay for the vet, to put her down. And if you're not at the station by the time the train goes, it's bye-bye." Then Mirabelle finished herself off. She gave a low, mournful cry and messed on the trousers of his only half-decent suit. I didn't stay to be argued with. I picked up my suitcase and left. I will never forget the look the cat gave me as I walked out the door. It was as if she knew. Harry was at the station on time, alone. Back in the shower, I told myself I was being stupid. By the time I'd dressed, I'd convinced myself the cat on the stairs was nothing like Mirabelle. The world was full of large, fat, arrogant, blotched tabbies. The world was also full of slightly dotty 63-year-old women, so I'd better pull myself together before I joined them. The end of August is like a great tide going out. The world is suddenly too full of trees, and the trees are too full of leaves, and the leaves fade from green to dark gray like an old photograph left too long in the glaring sun. And even the quality of the sunlight fails, not the quantity, but the quality. It is almost as if the eyes have had too much sunlight and can't take it in any more, so that there is a sudden darkness in the midst of the sunlight. And the heat is a dead heat, the dead heat of a kiln just turned off because the final temperature has been reached. And all your friends are far away, and all the village organizations are asleep. Even the vicar is away, and the Sunday service is taken by some uncouth and nervous stranger from the nearest town, and the final test drones down to an endless, hopeless draw. I listen to the sleepy commentary, and I imagine the players, lost in the dark sunlight, moving slower and slower, and the commentator's eyelids drooping. Someone, before the First World War, wrote a novel in which the Germans invaded on August Bank holiday, and won because nobody on our side could bother to mobilize. That writer knew August. But I'm a doer. I have a horror of nothing to do. I have been a doer all my life. If I cannot do, I begin to cease to be. I grasped at tiny things, like straws. I was glad that Mrs. Temple, our housekeeper, had gone to Ibiza with her husband, so that at least I had the cooking and dusting. I swept up the first errant autumn leaves when there were not enough to make a trugful. I cut down plants long before their time. I made sudden, despairing telephone calls to town, to people who I had lost touch with for years, only to find they were away too. Harry does not seem to mind. He reads, he sleeps in the sun. He does not sprawl disgustedly in his sleep like some elderly men. He curls up gracefully, like a cat. He smiles in his sleep, like a cat. And like a cat, it is impossible to tell if he is really asleep when I come into the room, or just pretending. Even awake, he is oddly far away, further away than he has ever been. It makes me nervous. I try to coax him into doing things, but he knows they are needless. He will do them when autumn comes, after we are back from the Adriatic, or we will get a man to do them. I don't press him. We have always had this bargain. He has written his play for the year. Soon he will begin gathering stuff for his travel book. Fair's fair. So why does it make me so afraid? I've seen another cat, a quite different cat, a long-haired white cat, playing in and out of the shrubbery under the shadow of the dark rhododendron leaves, like a moth fluttering at a lamp-lit window after dark, coming and going. I shouted at it when I came round the corner of the house, waved my arms to scare it. It paused, looked at me with dark, empty eyes from a head like a beautiful skull, then went on flitting in and out. Harry was asleep on the lounger, under the French windows which were open to cool the house. I gave him a tooroo poke, because I was seized with the awful irrational fear that he might be dead. He came awake, smiling again, as if he'd had yet another pleasant dream. "There was another damn cat," I said crossly. "Didn't you see it?" "Where?" he said, and he looked straight at the shrubbery, when he could have looked anywhere. "What color was it?" "White," I said flatly. "A white long hair, playing in that shrubbery, where you were just looking." "I can't see any cat." Was he laughing at me again? "It's gone now," I said shortly. "Funny. It's always you who sees them. It isn't as if you're a lover of them. A white long hair, you say? Sounds like Imogen's cat, Suki." Imogen. Imogen Smallbridge. I first heard her name over the telephone when Derek Pither phoned me from Rome. He said he wanted a quiet little word with me. Derek was famous for his quiet little words. Few could have been as devastating as the one I got. Harry had gone off the rails in Rome, right in the middle of a lecturing tour for the British Council that I had worked heavens hard to get him. He had missed giving his talk in Florence, and the one in Venice was due that day, and there was no sign of Harry. And Derek had a jolly good idea where Harry and Imogen Smallbridge had gone. A boat she had hired for the summer, tied up in Malta. Well, I flew straight out, cursing my own stupidity. It was the first time in 5 years I'd let Harry off the reins. We reached Valletta harbor that evening in one of those ridiculous horse-drawn things. Upset as I was, I had to pause as I got down from that ridiculously smelly old open carriage. Valletta harbor is grand theater. The huge stone quays, the nooks and crannies of water leading out of sight, the houses peering one over the other like people in the gods at a theater, the distant domes. It was a very fine sunset. All the western half of the harbor was already slipping into blue shadow, but the eastern half glowed as if freshly cast in gold. The air was like a soothing, warm bath on my bare arms. I was bitterly entranced. What an evening to be happy, if the world had been different. The water of the harbor, filthy as it was, looked fresh and pale blue. There was an aircraft carrier at anchor. We still had carriers in those days. A 3-funnel troop ship full of troops returning from Egypt was just sliding in to anchor alongside. Rows of silent sailors watched from the carrier. Rows of soldiers in khaki drill started back silently from the troop ship. I was caught up in that magic that can accompany the worst misery. Then the troop ship anchor rattled down, and a single voice, of course, jeering, called to the carrier from the troop ship, "Get your knees brown!" And in a moment there was a barrage of insults from both ships, and the magic was broken forever. And Derek Pither, little fat, balding Derek with his bad breath, who I could never stand but whom I clung to now, pointed down to where a white boat lay against the quay, already overcome by blue shadow. We went down an endless succession of worn, sandy, treacherous steps and crept aboard like thieves. I remember the gap between the boat and the quay, oily water full of small oranges, and the bloated body of a dog, with a swollen belly that the hair was starting to fray off. The gangway I crossed sagged as I stepped on it, and I nearly missed the handrail and fell into the water, and didn't really care. All I remember about the boat was that it was big and white and didn't seem in very good repair. Patches of white paint had flaked off, and the handrails were rusty. From the upraised ventilator of a skylight, a scratchy gramophone record played. Bessie Smith's coarse voice yelling. I knew I had found him, even before I saw the long-haired white cat sitting at the top of the companionway, almost like a schoolboy keeping watch for his friends. The cat looked at me, and I looked at the cat. It was bold, bolder than any dog would dare to be, stared me out, its only sign of anxiety a front paw raised in the air, as if about to strike me. Then its eyes faltered from left to right. It licked its lips and swallowed twice. I swung at it wildly with my bag, and with a spit it had wriggled through a gap of open door and run down inside. I heard Harry's voice say languidly, "What's the matter, Suki? What's upset you?" And then I stormed down out of the sunlight and air into the dark cabin. The smell of booze and bodies, not dead bodies, living, blatant bodies. The smell of frying and French cigarettes. They were sitting on a padded couch with lockers underneath it. The padding of the leather was scuffed. Harry's white shirt, which 2 weeks ago I'd washed and ironed, was filthy and open at the neck. There were spots on his lightweight trousers, and he didn't seem to have bothered to comb his hair, none of which surprised me any more than the row of empties stacked at the top of the companionway had. What surprised me was Imogen Smallbridge. I had been expecting a tart. I would have welcomed a tart. I could have quickly dismissed a tart from my memories, but Imogen Smallbridge was not a tart. She looked every inch the lady, tall, slim, in clean white slacks and an open-necked shirt of white and green bands, neat leather sandals on long, neat, clean feet, an enviably long neck, dark hair pulled tightly back in a bun, about 35, and the knuckles of her long hands already enlarged with arthritis. Her spectacles gave her an intellectual look, but her cheekbones were beautiful, and her eyes the saddest I have ever seen. You can see why I would have welcomed a tart. "Who is it?" asked Harry in a cheerful voice. "Do we know you?" I was in silhouette against the light of the companionway. He hadn't recognized me yet. So I had a long moment to savor their togetherness, the relaxedness of their bodies sitting side by side, the hands coiled together loosely because of the sweaty heat. It was the way he said "we" that hurt so much. Oh, yes, I remember them in their cozy paradise, and the cat at their feet, glaring at me as if it would like to kill me, paw uplifted to strike, ears back. I won't go into all of that passed between us. Suffice it to say that in the end I gave Harry the same old choice. He still wasn't established then. His job was better, but still the gift of my father. The man who was publishing Harry's first travel book was a friend of my father. So was the magazine editor who gave Harry poetry books to review. Harry came to the airport on time. I watched him say goodbye to Imogen Smallbridge at the gate to the airport. I never asked what he said to her. 2 weeks later, she got the engine of her boat going and sailed out into one of those savage little storms that they get off of Malta. Neither she nor her hired boat were ever seen again. I suppose the white cat went with her. I don't think he cared for any of them after Imogen Smallbridge. I even think he went out of his way to choose girls who would not be hurt when they lost him. As far as I ever found out, none of them vanished in tragic circumstances. They just smiled and forgot him. After all, it was the swinging 60s. He didn't try to hide them. I was always aware when a thing started. A strange smell on his clothes as I picked them up for the laundry basket, and the cat hairs on his trousers, of course, that I could stroke up into thick whorls with my hand. So I could tell what color of cat it was this time. I didn't try to break any more of his things up. I thought he was getting a taste for histrionic scenes, and in the swinging 60s, histrionic scenes were getting more and more ridiculous. It was a bad time to be a possessive wife. It was a good time to be a girl with a pet cat. I never thought of leaving him. There was too much to do. He was having his great successes. Hard Morning at the Royal Court, Sunderland Boy at the Roundhouse, and then in the West End. As the 60s drew on, and Wesker faded out of sight, and Pinter stuck at a certain level, and Osborne went embarrassing, Harry turned a little more popular in his views. Tough plays for the soft-hearted, provocative plays you could safely take your mother-in-law to, Darkling Thrush at the Duke of York's, Ambuscade at the Prince of Wales, even that damned musical that ran and ran, Midsummer Morning. Then he was the royal choice, Sir Harold Tremblay. Up there was Sir Terence Rattigan, Sir Harold Hobson, and Sir John Gielgud. A knight of the theatre, welcome on any TV discussion panel, putting the view of the intelligent, decent, common man. I think he started to ease up in his private life by the beginning of the 70s. After all, he was over 50, and success is so exhausting. But he made up for it with the cats, as he gave up going to bed with their owners. Any walk with him became a nightmare. He would spend hours crouched on his heels at some set of area railings, trying to coax the staring cat behind to come and be fondled. He kept a pocket full of those new cat biscuits to make sure they would follow us home through the hot summer streets. I don't think he ever thought of leaving me, either. He needed a tyrant to rebel against, a fascist dictatorship at home to make symbolic protests against, because it was too much bother to go and howl at the protest crowds in Trafalgar Square anymore. So cozy to have your own dictator handy. Well, I must stop writing. There was a large ginger cat sitting staring at me from the top of the garden wall. It has been there nearly half an hour, just staring. There are so many cats getting into the garden now. Every time I garden, I find their paw prints in the wet mud, on the paths after a shower, their scrabblings amidst my flowers, their hollowed-out resting places among my lavender bushes. The dogs do not deter them. It often seems to me the dogs are scared of them. Why are they coming? I'm actually afraid. This afternoon I got home and called out to Harry as I came in the front door. There was no reply. Frankly, it terrified me. He is such a creature of habit, usually. He writes in the mornings until 1. In the afternoon he reads, or lounges, or goes for a little walk, no doubt to find cats to talk to. In the evening we have people in, or go out ourselves, or watch television. He could not be out for a walk today. It had been nice earlier in the afternoon, but a hot wind had got up, and storm clouds had been gathering ominously. Anyone could tell there was going to be a storm, and Harry is as sharp about weather changes as a cat. And like cats, he hates wind and rain. Where was he? I ran upstairs to his study, thinking he might be asleep and might not have heard my calling. He wasn't there. He wasn't in any of the upstairs rooms. I heard a door bang downstairs. Bang, bang, then a tinkle of glass. The French windows! The French windows were banging in the wind. There was glass on the living room carpet, and outside in his lounger Harry lay, asleep, the rising wind ruffling his silver hair, the first drops of rain from the storm falling on him. Around him sat 4 cats, and there was a gray cat lying on his chest. They were all staring at his face. Then they seemed to sense me and turned to stare at me. Have you ever been stared at by 5 cats all together, with hate in their eyes? For a moment I couldn't move. I could only watch the movements of the huge, thin, straggly gray cat that lay upon Harry's chest. Its paws were in constant movement, kneading at the wool of the gray jumper he wore, the claws going in and out, pounding at him just where his heart was. I might have stood there forever, caught in the web of those 5 sets of eyes, if the French windows hadn't banged again, breaking another pane of glass. I ran at them, shouting, screaming my head off, actually. The French windows seemed to have slammed shut. I wrestled desperately with the handle, and then they were open again, and I fell through, tripping over the step and almost going full length across Harry and the lounger. He opened his eyes sleepily, bewildered. Helen, what the... I pushed myself up by my hands and stared around. There wasn't a cat in sight, just a scatter of yellow autumn leaves blowing across the patio, lodging round the legs of Harry's lounger, and the increasing shilling-sized spots of rain. I got him indoors by main force as the storm started in earnest. He seemed very sluggish, dazed. I took him into the kitchen and made us both a strong cup of tea. The tea seemed to revive him, though he still looked very pale and drawn. He said, almost to himself, "I've been asleep. I've been a long way away." "You have been asleep, Harry, with that great cat on your chest." I was too frightened and relieved to nag him. "What great cat?" He seemed genuinely surprised for once, not having me on. "A great big, gray, scraggy thing, long hair, thin as a rake." "I don't like gray cats," he said and shuddered. "I don't like thin cats. I like fat cats." He really did seem bewildered. "It doesn't remind you of any lady's cat in particular, then?" I was getting back the courage to be spiteful. He shook his head thoughtfully. "I never knew anyone with a thin gray cat. I don't like them." He shuddered again. "You've got yourself chilled, Harry," I said. "What made you go out with a storm brewing up?" "It was sunny when I went out there. After lunch, I must have dozed off." "You must have been asleep over an hour. What were you thinking of?" "I must have been very tired. I didn't sleep well last night." Suddenly his face changed, and he said, "I'm glad to see you." "Well, I'm glad to see you, too. I leave you too much on your own." He smiled at me. "Perhaps you do." For some reason, I held his hand, and he let me. "I won't leave you alone so much in the future," I said. "Good. I think I'll have a bath to warm myself up." He got up stiffly. Suddenly, for the first time, I thought of him as old, someone to be looked after. I lit the fire in the lounge, though I didn't put on the central heating. It didn't seem cold enough for that, though with the storm it had got colder. We had our supper by the fire and were cozy. Just before I switched on the television, he said to me, "We haven't been very nice to each other, have we, Helen?" "No, it's not been bad these last 10 years anyway. We've stopped hurting each other." "Yes, we've stopped hurting each other, like an old cat and an old dog who've got too old for the game." "Would you rather we'd gone on hurting each other?" He smiled oddly. "Well, it was fun in the old days." "Well, it wasn't fun for me." I said shortly, and switched on the telly. I've regretted turning on that damned set ever since. I think he wanted to talk to me for the first time, really talk to me for the first time in years. But I was tired and still shaken. I didn't want to be shaken any more that night. As you get older, you can't take it anymore. And yet, as I turned on the set, I thought wistfully of the nights we stayed up to have a row all night. When we were young, we meant that much to each other back then. We'd make up, make love, with the first of the dawn streaking through the bedroom curtains, and lie snuggled tight and warm until lunchtime and someone frantically ringing the doorbell. 2 days later, Harry went up to London to see his publisher and spend the night at his house. He disliked the long journey to London and liked a night to recover before coming back. I smiled to myself as I made my hot water bottle, for the weather had really turned cold, as it sometimes does at the end of August, and electric blankets were not in the beds yet. I had let Harry off the hook again. He was on his own in London. He might be doing anything, just like old times. In a perverse way, I almost liked the thought. It made me feel younger, somehow, especially as I knew my fancy was rubbish. Harry was too old, and Paul Dean much too thorough a host and raconteur. Still, some imp of fancy made me ring Paul Dean's house, playing some foolish charade of being the wronged and suspicious wife. Of course, Paul Dean himself answered and said he and Harry were in the library, having a last brandy and putting the world to bed. Did I want a word with him? Harry came on, a little baffled at such wifely concern, but mellow with brandy, and, I think, a little touched and sentimental. We said quite a fond good night. I started up the stairs, and the damn blotched tabby was there again, staring down at me with that infinite knowing air of superiority. I was not frightened. I had just heard Harry's voice, warm and relaxed, 200 miles away, and quite safe. I just went berserk that a cat should dare to invade my new-found glow of happiness. "The dogs'll settle you," I said to it. "Just you wait and see." I went back down to the kitchen, where the dogs were already curled up sleepily in their beds. They wagged their tails feebly, but refused to move. They seemed apologetic. It wasn't typical. An invitation to come upstairs with me, last thing at night, is usually greeted with great enthusiasm. I'm afraid I lost my temper and grabbed their collars and began to haul them out to the hall by main strength. They fought me all the way, squirming and collapsing in a heap, whining and licking their lips, cringing even. I got them as far as the foot of the stairs, dragging them across the shiny parquet. Golden Labradors are a fair weight, especially when they are starting to get a bit old and fat. But I did it, one hand through each collar. I realize now that I couldn't have been in a normal mood, even at that point. At the foot of the stairs they collapsed completely, just squirming, trembling heaps of slack bone and muscle, keening soft and low in their throats. I despaired and let go of their collars. Immediately they fled back to the kitchen. And still I was not afraid. The dogs' leads hang on the hall stand. One of them is a thing I've never liked, half a leash and half a whip, a kind of braided thing from South Africa that could be used to beat a dog half to death. I had never dreamt of using it on poor Rory and Bruce. I would not use it on any animal, even as a leash. I hated it. But now I picked it up. That thing on the stairs was not an animal. It was a fiend that was persecuting me. I would destroy it. I ran up the stairs. It saw the whip. A quick glance, then its arrogant eyes were back on my face, rejecting, hating, taunting. I was crazed by its arrogance. I raised the whip and brought it down with all my strength. It missed and hit the stair carpet with a force that stung my hand. I could not understand how I could have missed. I could not understand how the beast had not moved or even flinched, but continued to glare up at me, half crouched, ears back, mouth open in a silent snarl. I struck again and again, each time harder than the last. And each time I missed, hit the top step instead, with a sound like a hollow drum. It was insane. The world was insane. The world was twisting under my mind into unbelievable shapes. I could not go on missing at this range. The cat could not still be there, snarling silent defiance. And then I watched my next blow carefully, with what sanity I could still muster. I was not missing. That whip passed straight through the cat and hit the carpet beneath it. The next second, the blotched tabby cat was no longer there. It was not in the upper hall, with all its doors closed, not in the lower hall, which was bare and well lit, and certainly not in the kitchen with the dogs, not in the house at all. I sat in the lounge a long time, trembling and drinking whiskey over the revived remains of the log fire. I finally went up to bed as dawn broke, and some kind of order returned to the world. I went up to bed without hope of sleeping. I think I hoped I might lie on my bed fully dressed and doze for a few hours before facing another day. But something made me stop at the closed door of Harry's study. I was a long time opening that door. When I did, the blotched tabby was sitting on Harry's desk in the window. I could not see any detail of it because it was hunched on his pile of full scrap paper against the light. But from the way it rocked, I knew that it was purring. Well, the house is full of cats now. They flick at the corners of my eye, and then when I look, they are gone, under a chair, behind a couch, but I know there is no point in searching for them. They are all ghosts. And yet, in the corner of my eye, I seem to see them quite clearly, a sort of detailed blur. It is often the long-haired white cat, Imogene's cat. Its fur is sleeked close to its skin, as if it had just emerged from water. There is a ginger cat with a white chest. There is a black cat that is no more than 2 green eyes glaring out of the shadow beneath a chair. I ignore them, as I ignore the cats in the garden. I think the cats in the garden are real, for they leave paw prints. I do not mind them. They only sit and stare at the house, as if waiting for something. They are waiting for Harry. He is ill. The doctor does not know what is the matter. They have done tests and can find nothing wrong. The doctor talks of overwork, of Harry needing to rest. But he has been resting for 3 weeks now. He never needed so much rest any other August. And the more he rests, the more he sleeps, the wearier he is. He hardly bothers to read now. He picks up a book listlessly, and then I come back in 10 minutes and he is dozing over it. I think the cats are draining his life away, and he is letting them. When he is awake, he is very affectionate. He kisses my hand. He says I have looked after him very well. He says I have done my best, according to my lights. He forgives me for everything I have ever done to him. I would rather that he hated me. Then there would be some hope. Then there would be something to hold him to this world. Tonight, he said, "I'm sorry, Helen. I went too far away. I can't get back." Before I could ask him what he meant, he had fallen asleep again. My one consolation is that the cats mean him no harm. I know that in their own way they love him. It is me they hate. I have put the dogs into kennels. Left here, they did nothing but cower in their beds. They would not eat, and their toilet training was breaking down. I rang the kennels this morning. They are quite happy there and recovering rapidly. I have just come down from Harry's study. I was going to his bedroom to see if he wanted anything when something made me open the study door. He was sitting in his desk chair with his back turned to the desk and the window, the way he always sits when he is stuck in his writing and thinking. He had his head up. He looked better than he had done for weeks. He was actually dressed in a baggy old pair of trousers and sloppy old sweater that I thought I'd thrown out years ago. I could not see him well against the light, but I saw his cheek curve out in silhouette as he smiled at me, that old lazy smile. "You're better," I said, amazed and glad. "Yes," he said, "I'm all right now. It was a worrying time, but it's over. I'm fine now." I began to weep from sheer relief. He said kindly, affectionately, "Don't cry now. I'm sorry you've been so worried. I've been a burden to you. I've made your life wretched." "Well, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. We've got to look to the future, Harry. There's so much still to do." "Yes," he said, and smiled again. "There's still so much to do." He sounded glad. I took a step towards him, a step into the room. It gave me a clearer look at him, because the swivel chair is big and enclosing, with high back and arms, like half an egg on a swivel. I saw there was a cat sitting in his lap, a blotched tabby, not snarling at me now, but rocking, purring, triumphant. And I watched his hand go down to caress her. I expected to see his hand pass straight through her, but it didn't. It rested gently on her back. I saw her fur bend beneath it. They were together, as they had been so long ago in that wretched flat in King's Cross. "Goodbye, Helen," he said. "Goodbye, and thanks, and sorry. I am me, and you are you. Who am I to cast the first stone?" And then the chair was empty. I did not go to the bedroom. I knew what I should find. The house is empty. No more ghosts. How I wish there could be ghosts now. The real cats are still sitting in the garden, front paws together and tails wrapped round. They are so still, they might be statues. They look ceremonial, like mourners. They are paying their respects to Harry. I must ring the doctor, or the ambulance, or the police. I only wish I could move from this chair. Thank you for listening to this week's story, and I hope you'll join us next week for another episode of Friday Night Frights. This is your host, Ginger Winters. Have a great week, everyone. As a beekeeper, I know bees are generally friendly little critters until they're not. No matter how careful you are, sooner or later, you're gonna feel the sting. That's why I keep Bee Itch Stop close by. Made right here in Nevada with all natural ingredients, it soothes the burns, calms the swelling, and takes the itch right out. Safe for all ages and skin types. It works on mosquito bites, wasp stings, spider bites, and even cactus thorns and poison ivy. Whether you're tending hives or just enjoying the great outdoors, don't get caught without Bee Itch Stop. Get yours today.